Welcome to InkThinks. For as long as I've been following Smash speculation, Skull Kid from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask has always been a popular character in conversations surrounding the game. A lot of people expected to see him, or really any new Zelda character, in the base game, and as the DLC gets closer and closer to its inevitable conclusion, it seems like times are growing dire for fans of this franchise. But why is Skull Kid of all characters so popular within the speculation scene? And more importantly, what chances does he honestly stand of getting into the game? Well, today I'm going to break down every single argument, both for and against Skull Kid, to determine his final chances of getting into Fighter Pack 2. And then I'm going to give my own personal thoughts and ranking at the end of the video. Let's get into it. One of the most successful franchises of all time is The Legend of Zelda, and within this series came the creme de la creme, which is widely considered to be Ocarina of Time, or at least it was that way for years, and it is nearly impossible to state how widely praised this game was and still is, and it isn't without good reason. The entry marked an incredible new three-dimensional direction for the series. It held a mysterious sense of adventure, and it was super fluid and fun to play. The game also left a huge impact on gaming, and in general that continues even today. One of its biggest innovations was the mechanic of Z-targeting. By pressing the Z trigger on a Nintendo 64 controller, a player was able to lock onto an enemy or NPC. This didn't just make combat easier, but it also added a whole new movement system by enabling strafing around the target, and it also allowed jumps to become more evasive by incorporating sidesteps and backflips. Here's a quick fun fact for you about that movement system. We all probably spent our time in Hyrule rolling around everywhere we went, but that actually isn't as fast as getting around with side hops or walking backwards. The more you know, I guess. I had no idea. But you can see this Z-targeting mechanic manifested in some of the more popular modern 3D combat games. Things like The Witcher 3, Bloodborne, or Dark Souls. The list goes on and on. But not only did this new mechanic help make combat more natural, but it also made the combat easier to script so that an enemy could jump or attack at just the right time to make things more interesting. The designer Yoshiaki Koizumi said that this element of combat was inspired by watching a theatrical sword fight at Toei Kyoto Studio Park. He said, "I thought there must be some kind of trick, so I watched closely and it was simple. It's a sword battle, so there's a script and certainly a setup, and the enemies don't all attack at once. First, one attacks while the others wait, and then the first guy goes down, and then the next one steps in, and so on." This sounds like a common sense element of game designing now, but it was revolutionary at the time. It's also hard to imagine a gaming world without this sort of lock-on feature at this point. Apart from just a combat system though, Ocarina of Time innovated with the concept of a contextual function button. Previously, if the game didn't have enough buttons on a controller for the amount of actions that they wanted to do in a game, the developers would add a button that would unlock additional features for that button. Pretty common sense stuff, but where Zelda innovated was the idea of this contextualized action button. You know how in games like Zelda, the A button will either talk to NPCs, mount Epona, pick up a rock, or more depending on where your character is? Well, Ocarina of Time started it all. We can see this concept even carry over to more modern games, like when the creators of Red Dead Redemption 2 decided to make the talk to lady button and the point shotgun at lady button the same thing depending on the situation. Zelda also innovated with expansive overworlds, puzzle design, and the use of music and symbolism. What I'm getting at is this game was one of the greatest ever made for its time, and this obviously put a lot of pressure on the development team that was tasked to make a follow-up. But somehow, despite all of this pressure, torturous work schedules, and changing technology, a sequel was made in an incredibly short amount of time by utilizing the assets of Ocarina of Time. One of the biggest miracles in gaming, though, is the fact that Nintendo somehow made The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask just as good, if not better, than its predecessor in just 1 year of development time. Majora's Mask was an incredible success and left an impact on generations of gaming. While Ocarina of Time may have had more influence on gaming in general, Majora's Mask took the symbolism and emotion behind the original game and cranked it up to 11. Majora's Mask also did have a unique idea with its time manipulation system, but what really set it apart was the ability to instill a lasting impact on the players emotionally. To me, the entire Legend of Zelda series is about hope and helplessness simultaneously. Nearly every title explores what happens when a people waits for a hero that doesn't come, or deals with a hero that does come but can't measure up to the task. Other times, there's a plague or an immense threat across the land. Majora's Mask exemplifies on this more than any other entry in the series. We see the citizens of Clocktown living their lives as they slowly realize that their world will soon come to an end by the hand of a gigantic moon that's destined to destroy the city. We see denial, anger, grief, and people just trying to squeeze in any time they have left with the people that they love the most. Above all though, we get this sense of a groundswell of hope that's rising up for somebody to save them. Majora's Mask gives players the power to become that hero that they are all looking for, and to become a beacon of hope to the people of Hyrule. This kind of story and theming is bound to leave an impact on its players, and so it's no wonder why people still remember this game most fondly above other Zelda games, despite it not having the same innovations as Ocarina of Time. When a game affects you like this, it's only natural that one would want to see it represented in a favorite series like Super Smash Bros. One of the most memorable characters from the game is Skull Kid, a child who's possessed by the spirit of Majora. He's prominent through the entire game and is inseparable to the game in the minds of the public. And I think this is the biggest reason people want to see him in Smash. He looks awesome, he's unique, and his game left a considerable impact on its players. He initially started as a somewhat niche pick, but a few popular videos and images like this one got a ton of people talking. From what I've seen, he's the most popular Zelda character being asked for by the Smash community. But I think that it's important to break down what that might actually mean. In my Geno video, I talked about how I thought that Geno didn't actually have a ton of wide-reaching popularity, but rather he became so talked about within the Smash community that his fame became artificially inflated. While I do believe that speculation around Skull Kid has led to more and more speculation around Skull Kid, I don't think that is entirely the same situation as Geno. Geno was a side character in a niche game that sold 1.5 million copies. You can see my full breakdown on the character in the top right hand corner. Skull Kid is the main antagonist from a follow-up to one of the most influential games of all time, and his game sold just over 5 million copies when combining the 3D remake and the original Nintendo 64 title. The comparison isn't even close to me between these two. I think that the sales of not only Majora's Mask, but the sales of the entire Zelda series as a whole speaks for itself. I've said it before on this channel, and I'll say it again. The Legend of Zelda desperately needs some new characters to represent it in Smash. Now, don't get me wrong, we have 6 characters, which isn't bad at all. But those characters are comprised of 3 Links, 2 Zeldas, and 1 Ganondorf. We don't have any non-Triforce characters in the game, which is a travesty in my opinion. There are so many great options, and Skull Kid is definitely one of them, and the most popularly requested one. In general, I think that if we're debating between a first-party series to represent in Smash, The Legend of Zelda is a top contender. I think that there's probably very little debate around that. But I also think that it's important to look at Skull Kid himself as a candidate. Sure, he's popular and the face of probably the most iconic Zelda game, but there are also a few things that could be working against him. For starters, he's not in every Zelda game. A Skull Kid has appeared in Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and of course Majora's Mask, but not counting the spin-off games, those are really it. Now, while this doesn't look super great for him, I do want to remind everyone that Sheik was only featured in a single Legend of Zelda game, so we know that the sheer quantity of games isn't the deciding factor. We could also argue that it's the impact of games like this that makes a real difference here, which is why we see Sheik, and if that's the case, it would make sense that a Majora's Mask would theoretically qualify. I mean, we saw huge hype and support with the 3D release of the game, and I'm also not entirely certain whether or not young Link is representing Majora's Mask, but I think that the entire argument around Skull Kid's prominence in Zelda games is flawed at its core, because we haven't seen a pattern to determine whether or not sheer numbers are the X factor to get you into the game. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Skull Kid is also a Mii costume and an assist trophy. Now, I've talked about the assist trophy issue many times on my channel, and if you want to know my extended thoughts, I'm going to post to a link in the top right hand corner where I talk about the assist trophy argument breaking down against Waluigi. I think that a lot of it really does carry over here and applies to Mii costumes. Now, I want to make my personal position perfectly clear here, because it gets misrepresented often. I'm what I call an assist trophy agnostic. What I mean is that I don't necessarily think that assist trophies or Mii costumes disconfirm characters as fighters, because we don't have enough strong evidence to suggest one way or another, only a pattern. At the same time, we don't have much to suggest that they will be added to the game. I mean, we've seen Bomberman go from assist trophy to Mii costume, but it's hard to know if that's something that's going to continue onto a fully fledged fighter. A lot of the arguments against assist trophies come down to bad assertions based on the idea of, well, if Nintendo hasn't done it, that means they won't do it. But that's a fallacy that doesn't really hold up when you apply the logic to other patterns, such as there not being a character in Smash whose name starts with the letter Q. There's just a bit too much ambiguity here to say one way or another. As for my opinion, do I think he's likely to get in? Honestly, not really. I think that a Zelda rep is decently likely, especially when talking about first-party DLC, but I also think that it's difficult to know what direction Nintendo would take the pick if they do decide to go with a Zelda rep. We know from the aforementioned Mii costume and Assist Trophy that Skull Kid is definitely up there on Nintendo's mind, but the variable here is whether or not Skull Kid is going to be able to make himself stick out against other characters from the series who aren't already represented as Assist Trophies or Mii costumes. Characters like Impa or the Champions are very prominent right now in the Zelda universe, and it's hard for me to say whether or not Skull Kid would be able to eclipse that popularity and take the spot himself. I'm gonna give Skull Kid a 3 out of 10. What do you think? Do you agree? Let me know who to cover next and click the playlist on the right to see my entire final analysis series, or click the video on the left to see something that YouTube handpicked just for you. Do you want to see exclusive content, have direct conversations with me, or get feedback on your own content? If so, consider backing me on Patreon with the link in the description. Until next time, stay smashing.